Hey YouTube. So you want to run your 110 volt or 220 volt standard household fridge or mini fridge off of batteries because maybe you've got solar, you want to go off grid, or you're mobile in an RV and you need to be off grid. Well, first thing we're going to find out is when we plug the fridge in to the battery. Well, you can't plug the fridge into the battery because there's no way to do it. And even if you could, it wouldn't work because this is 110 volt AC that the fridge is running on, and the battery stores DC, and it's only at 12 volts. So we need some way either to convert this battery to 110 volts AC and run the compressor that's in this fridge now, or swap the compressor out for one that's wound to run on 12 volts DC. So the typical solution, and so for some people it's the cheapest solution, is to run the fridge off an inverter. So the inverter connects to the 12 volt DC on the battery here, and on the other end we get 110 volts AC out. Is that clear there? So you plug the fridge into that. Now this can be, if you live somewhere where you get tons of solar, like California, for example, there's a lot of van dwellers there. It'll work. But when you live somewhere like Vancouver, like myself, it's typically raining 3/4 of the year. You have overcast skies, and you don't get a lot of solar production. And the problem with this inverter is that you lose efficiency. So you're running off the batteries, maybe you lose like 10 to 20% efficiency just to the inverter converting it. So we're wasting power that way, but then we're also wasting power in the sense that when the fridge isn't on, so the compressor during the day will kick on and off to maintain the temperature in the fridge. But when it's off, the inverter still needs to be on so it can supply power to the fridge when the compressor goes to kick on again. And these inverters use power even when they're on, but they're not powering anything. And so you have to find an inverter that has a really good standby mode that uses very little power, or you end up with one that uses maybe like 50 to 150 watts per day just on standby. I mean, 50 would be pretty good, a pretty good inverter actually. So a solution that the industry came up with is the 12 volt Danfoss compressor. Now they make Chinese 12 volt compressors as well. They're common in some of the lesser known brands, but most of the fridges that you buy for sailboats and van life and trucks that are 12 volt run on a Danfoss compressor. Now I'll show you that. I have that installed in the back of this fridge, and I'll go over in this video about the process as to how to install it. It's actually not that complicated. You know, there's some tools that you need, but you can do it for really cheap, and you don't really need to spend that much money on tools. It depends on how much of a refrigerant purist you are, and I'm sure I might get some people that comment on this video saying, oh, like you need this and this, but I've done it perfectly fine with what I've got. So so I'll kind of show you how it works here. So in the back we have a Danfoss compressor here. So this one runs on 12 volts. It's wound to run, I think the inverter that's built into it, a very, very, very efficient inverter, it's not necessarily running on 12 volts, but the input to it is 12 volts. And this was the original compressor in the fridge. It was 110 volts, 60 hertz AC. And basically, what you want to do is find a donor fridge. This was a fridge that someone actually threw out at the recycling depot. And I picked this one in particular because it has a separate freezer. That's really uncommon to find in these fridges. And just hold off, I'm just going to tell you about some of the parts and tools that you need to do this, but I'm just going over some of the theory here. So the compressor here is going to have one of these is going to be blocked off, and then you're going to have a high and a low. And the low is going to be, this has been cut all the way so you can't see, but the low is going to be thicker and the high is going to be thinner. And these compressors, what differs from them and Danfoss compressors is also usually on the Danfoss compressors, they have a fill valve soldered on. And this makes it really easy to charge this fridge once we put this compressor in. So I'll just go over some of the other tools that we need here to do this. So you're going to need silver solder. You need to get silver solder. You can't just get like any typical solder or plumbing solder, because it's not going to be strong enough to hold the refrigerant in the lines. You're going to get leaks. And then you're going to need some extra copper pipe. Maybe you can find some somewhere, like at a depot. You don't necessarily need to buy some, but you don't need so little anyway, so just go out and buy some. And you're going to need R134A refrigerant. Now this is really easy to find in the United States. This actually came from Walmart in the US. But in Canada, you can't buy it on the shelves. Only like certified refrigerant technicians are allowed to have it. And this is the one that works. I've tried the alternatives in Canada that have butane and propane. You just don't get the pressures that you need to get the cooling effect that you need. So you want to get R134A, and you want to make sure that it has no dyes or stop leak or any of that stuff in there, because that's going to mess up your compressor. You don't want that. You just want pure R134A. And you're also going to want flux for when we're soldering with the silver solder. Here's the flux. My flux is pretty dirty here. And you're also going to want a torch. Hopefully if some of you are mechanically inclined or project inclined, or you got a parent that's interested in those kind of things, you might have some of these things lying around already. So you're going to want the R134A, and you're going to want the fill valve here. I think in the States you can get these on Amazon, and it has a pressure gauge, and that'll be helpful for what we're doing here. And on this end, it's got a quick connector, and this quick connector allows us to connect to the fill valve on the Danfoss compressor. Now, you're also going to want one of these here. This is a quick connector to convert the Schrader valve here to one that we can quick connect to with our can. Just a little bit more of the theory behind this. You're going to want to, first what you're going to do is cut out the old compressor, and you're going to want to look at your fridge, right? So you're going to make sure that your fridge has this kind of refrigerant here, R134A. Now there's only a little bit of R134A in here, and when you release it, all it is a greenhouse gas. So it's not, you can release a little bit of it. You can also have a refrigerant recycling machine, and you can store it in bottles so it doesn't get released into the atmosphere. But I am going to say that if you're using a donor fridge that doesn't have R134A, and it has R12 or an older kind of refrigerant, do not do this. Do not cut it, because those chemicals are ozone depleting. So they're putting holes in the ozone layer. So only do this with R134A if you don't have a recycling machine and you don't know how to do this. So you're going to cut your lines, and you're going to cut them with this tool here. This is a pipe cutter, and you just open it up, you put it around your pipes, and then you twist it so the blade's touching, and tighten it and spin it around. And that's how you cut. And just slowly let the refrigerant out. Again, only do this if it's R134A, and technically you still shouldn't be doing it anyways. And so we're gonna cut the lines, and then we're gonna unbolt the old compressor, which was this one here, unbolt it, and then we're gonna put in the new Danfoss compressor. So for sourcing these, this one I got from an old boat, and well, I don't know how old the boat was, but someone was selling this compressor, and I got it for about 150 bucks. Now that's a pretty good deal considering I got the fridge for free, and also the most cost prohibitive fridge in the off-grid fridge category is a Danfoss fridge. So a fridge of this cubic inch size at my local marine store, which is basically the only place I could get one locally, is $1,500 Canadian for this size. Now, you're paying mostly all of that for the compressor, and then the rest is just an insulated box, which is fairly cheap to produce, considering you can buy some mini fridges for like $100 that have a 110 volt compressor like this. So for $150, that's quite a steal. So if you can find one of these locally, sometimes what will happen is someone will have a system and then it'll get a leak in it, and then all their refrigerant will leave and their fridge won't work anymore, and they don't know how to repair it. The technician doesn't want to repair it or come on their boat or go in their RV, so they just sell the fridge at a loss. So if you can get one of these compressors, it's a good deal. The other thing we want to check is the donor fridge that you get. You're going to want to make sure that it doesn't have any leaks in the line. Typically there's an evaporator in here, and when it gets ice on it, people will go to clean it with a knife and they might puncture the evaporator. So look in there to see if there's any holes, and if there's holes, you want to put some epoxy putty like JB Weld on there and fill up the holes. Otherwise, when you vacuum it and you recharge it, it's going to leak. So I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think we're going to move on to the next step. So we put the compressor, the Danfoss compressor in. It's in right now, but we put the new Danfoss compressor in, we bolted it down, and now these lines, the high and the low, aren't going to be connected yet. And we're going to prep the area by putting flux on there. Up here we got our flux, we're going to brush it on, and then we're going to take our torch and solder it in. You can see I've done my solder connections there. And for connectors, when it's too wide or you need something wider to go in between these two pieces, that's when we have this extra copper that we can cut and we can put over, and then we can silver solder it. Remember, you have to use silver solder. I tried other kinds of solder, they don't work. Silver solder. This one in particular is plumbing silver bearing silver solder wire by Benzomatic, and you'll need your torch too. So you heat up the area with your torch, and then you apply the solder, and the solder will go to where you're applying the heat. So now we've got our Danfoss compressor in, and there's going to be some wiring for the fridge, and the wiring should be coming down here. Here's the wiring coming out of the fridge, and you're going to have to figure out which of these is the thermostat, because we need to preserve the thermostat from the original fridge. You're going to want to make sure that the donor fridge has a working thermostat, or you might have to replace it. And this is going to allow the compressor to kick on and off when we get to the right temperature. If your thermostat isn't working, either it's not going to work at all, or the compressor is just going to run continuously, and that's going to overheat your compressor, and it's going to make your fridge too cold. So here's the two lines for the thermostat down here that I've connected. I think that's to C and T. And then there's going to be a 110 volt power cord coming here that you normally would have plugged into your wall. You're just going to unscrew all that. There'll usually be a capacitor here too. Remove that, but be careful not to zap yourself. That's a very dangerous voltage to be working with. So make sure you're wearing gloves and you don't touch the two ends of the capacitor when you're removing it. Now that that's removed and we've got our thermostat all hooked up, we're going to hook up two lines. Here's one that I have here for the negative up top, the positive here. These are coming from the 12 volt battery. You're going to want to make sure that your module is plugged in like that. Sorry, my video got interrupted there. You're going to want to check the module, make sure that it's plugged in, and we're going to put that back together now. Just clips on like that. And before we charge this thing, we have to vacuum it out. And the reason for that is that if there's any moisture in the lines, that moisture is going to freeze when we charge it and it gets cold in there, and it might damage the compressor. Now, if you got your donor fridge and you just very recently cut it open and it hasn't been exposed to moist weather, then you might not need to vacuum it as strongly as one that you found in a moist environment. Preferably, you're going to find one that's from a dry climate, and that's been cut into very recently. So in order to vacuum it, you're going to need a fridge compressor. Now we're going to run the fridge compressor in reverse and use it as a vacuum rather as a compressor. And this is going to allow us for cheap to vacuum out one of these fridges. Yes, you can get, if you live in the States, you can get a fairly cheap vacuum pump for $100 at Harbor Freight. But if we're using a donor fridge and the donor fridge has a working compressor, we might as well use that compressor. So here's the donor fridge here. One of these is going to suck and one of these is going to blow. And you're going to find, for example, on this big heavier one that's going to pull a bit more of a vacuum, the one that sucks, which is here, and I've clamped on a hose. And then I can't remove the can from my gauge here, but you're going to get your gauge. It's punctured the can already, so if I remove it, my R134A is going to leak out there. But we're going to take the hose here, tape it on, and now we're going to connect the quick connector right there to the quick connector there. And what we're going to do is it should be showing something like 0, like that, just like that, because there's no pressure inside and there's no vacuum inside. And we're going to, I have a quick start here on this compressor so I can plug it in. I plug it into the wall, and now it's going to start pulling a vacuum. And you should see this gauge go to mercury here. So you want inches of mercury. A full vacuum, a perfect vacuum is 30 inches of mercury. You might be able to get like 25 or so. Preferably you want to get 29, 28 to get the moisture out, I believe. But if you're just getting the air out, this should do. You know, and even the smaller one should do as well. You just want to get the air out so the compressor isn't compressing air as well. Now, now that we've vacuumed it out, what we're going to check to make sure is if it's leaking or not. So vacuum it, leave it for a few hours, maybe listen for any hissing, leave it for like a few hours, then hook your gauge up again here, and then check to see if it's holding the same inches mercury of a vacuum. And if it is, then we know now it's safe to start charging it. So you turn the compressor on, and you do that by connecting your battery to these two leads, positive and negative there. And with the compressor running, you're going to connect your can up. You're going to use this to puncture your can, and you're going to let little bit in at a time, maybe like 5 seconds, and you're going to pressurize the fridge. You can look up online the values for what you want to pressurize it to, but going by the eye or touch, you want to get a tiny little bit of frost in the evaporator here, and that's when you know you've charged it enough. But if you've overcharged it, in most fridges you'll be able to see the line coming up to the evaporator. If that line is freezing, then you know you've overcharged it. If it's sweating, sorry, you can't see any of this because of the shadows, but if it's sweating, then you're good. But if it's freezing, the line going to the evaporator, then you've overcharged it, and you want to let out a little bit of gas. Be very conservative with the gas. I think to charge this, I only used maybe half a can, maybe even less. It really doesn't need that much refrigerant. And so you're gonna charge it up, and you really don't want to overcharge it, because if you overcharge it, you're putting too much pressure, too much work on the compressor, and the compressor might die. Now these compressors are smart, they have fail safes. It probably will protect it in the result that it's drawing too much current, but just be really slow with it and wait till you get a little bit of frost in the evaporator and a little bit of sweat on the evaporator tube lines going to the evaporator. So now you've charged your fridge, and we've hooked it up to power. We had to hook it up to power to charge it, and these are my lines. You just connect them to the battery like that, and then you connect them here like this. Obviously you have a better setup than mine. Mine's just for demonstrations here. And now your fridge should be working. And now you can use your fridge at many angles. Those propane fridges in RVs, typically they're very sensitive to angles. Now you can go at pretty intense angles. You can park on any terrain you want, and you can run your fridge and it'll be cold. So yes, I've been using this fridge just for testing purposes still. I like it quite a bit, but right now in the winter I still don't have enough solar on my roof to get enough production to run it without having an external form of charging, because we have cloudy weather 3/4 of the year here in Vancouver. So yeah, this is just a tutorial on how to do this. Some people get away with doing the inverter method, but if you're going to do that, I recommend that you get a pure sine wave inverter, not a modified sine wave, because when these compressors run off modified sine waves, they get hot, and when they get hot, they don't last as long. I'm talking about the original 110 volt compressors in here, not the Danfoss. And this can save you a lot of money. I spent, with tools and parts, maybe like $175, because some of the tools I already had around the house. But $175 on this fridge, when you bought this, it would be $1,500. And this is a way to get one of these stand-up fridges that, in my opinion, are better than the fridges that they usually make for vans that are in an affordable price range, that are usually just a cooler freezer that that open like a deep freeze like that, and then you have not a lot of space and you don't have shelving in there, and then the compressor in those takes up quite a bit of space as well, so you really don't get them. You're paying quite a bit of money for not a lot of space. This way you can get the freezer and a stand-up fridge all in one, and just swap it out with the three-way fridge that runs on propane in your van or your RV very easily. So please subscribe to my video. I'm still trying to get more of a subscriber base. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in my new videos. So thanks very much.